Today's will be something of a milestone for this channel because it's my first William Castle flick. Don't know who William Castle is? Think of him like the P.T. Barnum of movies. You'll see what I mean. The Tingler is a 1959 horror movie from producer-director William Castle, who was something of a pioneer in interactive movies. Always more of a showman than a filmmaker, his movies are almost as well known for the various gimmicks that accompanied their release. House on Haunted Hill had a gimmick called Emergo, where a plastic skeleton would fly over the audience at the climax of the film. In 13 Ghosts, he had theaters hand out tinted glasses that they could use to either see or not see ghosts at certain points in the movie. And in Mr. Sardonicus, he had a punishment poll where audiences could decide whether the main character lived or died, although this was a cheat since only one ending was ever filmed. But the Tingler featured probably his most infamous gimmick of all, called Percepto, where certain theater seats were rigged with buzzers that would vibrate at a fourth wall breaking part of the film, where it seemed like the monster had stepped out of the movie and into the theater. Castle even used paid actors at some screenings that would scream and pretend to faint. Yeah, that's right, William Castle was into 4D theaters before they were even a thing. Okay, so we know about the gimmick, but how's the actual movie? Well, a lot of people consider this to be Castle's best film, and it is definitely weird, even without the gimmick. And speaking of the gimmick, to really help sell it, William Castle actually introduces the movie himself.
I am William Castle. I feel obligated to warn you that some of the sensations which the actors on the screen will feel will also be experienced for the first time in motion picture history by certain members of this audience.
I kinda wish more directors did this. Imagine if Peter Jackson came out before The Hobbit and said, I shot this in a high frame rate so it looks like a daytime soap opera instead of a movie. It's a great idea that'll definitely catch on, trust me.
I say certain members because, well, some people are more sensitive to these mysterious electronic impulses than others.
Well, that and not every seat had the Percepto buzzers installed. Some theaters didn't even use them at all.
At any time you are conscious of a tingling sensation, you may obtain immediate relief by screaming.
You know, if William Castle were around today, I wonder if he'd encourage people to go on their cell phones during a movie. William Castle presents the only 50s monster movie that could also be its own porn parody. Well, okay, maybe not the only one, but you get what I'm saying. So we begin with the execution of a man who looks like he stepped straight out of an old EC comic book. And fun fact, in the 50s you were allowed to look at the body afterwards as long as you were related to the criminal.
I'm sorry, I didn't know it was a relative.
It's my wife's brother.
Okay. It's still kind of weird you're here, though. Vincent Price plays Dr. Warren Chapin, who performs autopsies on recently executed prisoners. Just as I suspected, he died from being in the electric chair, just like all the others. Man, this is an easy job. Of course, he does have some wacky theories of his own.
There's a force in all of us that science knows nothing about, the force of fear.
Maybe it's the force that makes your spine tingle when you're scared.
You know, it's odd, I've been experimenting with this force for years. Never had a name for it until now. Now I think I'll call it the Tingler.
Well, that is a better name than the Chiller, which is what this was originally going to be called. And turns out this autopsy isn't as simple as I thought, since the prisoner had his spine broken by an unknown force.
Something real and powerful broke those bones. And on the death certificate, I'll write down that death was caused by heart failure.
Yeah, they don't need to know what he really died of. Just like the government doesn't need to know how much money I actually made last year. And turns out the reason this guy was hanging around was so he could ask Warren for a ride home, which begs the question, how did he get here? And as far as him being the brother-in-law of an executed murderer, don't worry about it, because after this scene, it's never brought up again. The bald guy's name is Ollie Higgins, who runs a silent movie theater.
You'd be surprised, though, how many people come to see these old pictures. Not just to make fun, either.
Oh, what do you know? I guess making fun of old movies goes back further than I thought. Ollie runs the theater with his wife, Martha, who's a deaf mute. Okay, that's a little on the nose. If she was blind, would you run a radio station? Unfortunately for Martha, she's deathly afraid of chocolate sauce, blood.
Because she has no vocal cords, she can't release her fear tensions vocally as we can, so they continue to mount until At last she can't endure it.
Well, either that or her blood pressure drops suddenly, but hey, you're the doctor. Speaking of which, judging by the doc's house, doing autopsies on criminals pays really well. Screw being a neurosurgeon, the real money's in saying executed prisoners died from being executed. Warren's house is so big it even has its own lab, which he uses to conduct his experiments with his assistant David. Oh, and there's also Warren's sister-in-law, Lucy, who's just kinda there so David can have a love interest. She's one of those characters where you could cut her completely out of the movie and it wouldn't make much of a difference. In other words, don't expect her to get mentioned much for the rest of the video. Anyway, regarding his experiments, Warren thinks that fear produces a physical force that can grow strong enough to kill somebody.
Oh, by the way, I think I found a name for it. The Tingler. You like it?
The Tingler.
Really hammering that name home, huh, movie? And as part of his fear experiments, he plans to use a little drug by the name of LSD. Yeah, that's right, he plans on freaking people out by having them freak out.
You know, from the articles I've read, this is a very interesting drug.
Yeah, well, don't worry, Doc, because over the next decade or so, lots of people are gonna find out how interesting it is. And whoever wrote this book must have been on acid since they put the title on the back cover. Wait, where did he say he got this?
Well, yeah, I got the prescription for you.
Well, no wonder the 60s happened. In the 50s, you could get a prescription for acid just by asking for it. Hey, Doc, I got a problem. I tried listening to all 23 minutes of Pink Floyd's Echoes and I couldn't get through it. Do you have anything that could help me out? Before Warren can whip up some electric Kool-Aid, though, first he's got to deal with his cheating bitch wife.
Good evening.
I do wish you wouldn't stand around in the dark.
Feet hurt?
As a matter of fact, they do.
Okay, are they about to bang now?
Lucy is very upset, so is Dave, and for that matter, so am I.
The only way Dave Morris will marry my sister is over my dead body.
Ooh, probably shouldn't have said that in front of Vincent Price, lady.
Unconventional, but not impossible.
See? Told you. And regarding Warren's money...
Now remember this, everything you've got, I paid for.
Okay, he married a sugar mama. I guess confirming somebody died of a lethal injection immediately after getting one doesn't pay as well as I thought. I was not expecting a 50s monster flick called The Tingler to be so much like a soap opera. Warren's wife doesn't want her sister to marry Dave. He also says he knows she's cheating on him and hints that she killed her father for his inheritance. There's a lot going on here and we haven't even got to the monster yet. And I got news for you, lady. Nobody cucks Vincent Price and gets away with it. Okay, now to make it look like a suicide, chop her head off and put the axe in her hand to make it look like she did it herself. First though, better take some x-rays for posterity. Oh, and it turns out that was just a blank, so in addition to cheating on him, his wife's also dumb as shit.
I was going to use this cat, but you made a much better subject. Have you two met? In the same alley, perhaps?
Alright, as hokey as this movie can be, Vincent Price does have some good lines here. Well, now Warren finally has confirmation of what the Tingler is. It's a parasite inside all human beings that grows along the spine when people are afraid, and can only be suppressed by screaming. It's a completely ridiculous idea, even by 50s movie standards, but there is a surprising body horror element here that you don't often see in movies this old. I wouldn't be surprised if David Cronenberg saw this when he was young.
Could the Tingler be actually alive? A separate and living thing inside our bodies?
Why not?
So if the tingle you get when you're scared is because of a parasite, does that mean there's also an ASMR parasite? Like, is Bob Ross accidentally creating monsters every time he paints a happy little tree? Warren wants to do more experimenting, but since he can't pretend to shoot his wife again, he'll have to find a way to scare himself.
I want to personally sense the power of the Tingler. Only nothing scares me.
Yeah? Well, in 20 years you'll be on the Brady Bunch Variety Hour. Does that scare you? Eventually Warren decides to scare himself by turning on, tuning in, and dropping some acid.
Average injection, 50 micromilligrams. I'm making it 100 micromilligrams in solution.
100 micrograms, or as it's sometimes known, 1 Leary. And don't use a needle, stupid. Put a couple drops on a square of paper and put it under your tongue.
Definite blurring of vision now.
David, what does that stuff do to you?
Well, it makes the song Dark Star by the Grateful Dead sound a lot better, so that's something.
Well, for one thing, nightmares. You're wide awake, but you're having nightmares.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy Reagan. Fun fact, this was supposedly the first mainstream film to show somebody taking LSD. That's right, Vincent Price was the first guy to trip out on movie screens. Although I think he might be having a bad trip.
The walls. The walls.
Yeah, you can watch The Wall later. Right now you've got an experiment to do.
Lucy, there's nothing we can do to help him now. The effect of that acid must wear off naturally.
Okay, well, better find a way to kill about 12 hours then. Oh, wait, never mind. I think he's done.
Things were pretty foggy, but I remember thinking that I mustn't scream.
I also remember thinking I should line up The Wizard of Oz with an album, but it's 1959, so all I had was Harry Belafonte's Calypso. That still kinda worked. Well, you ruined the experiment by screaming, Doc. If only you had a subject that couldn't scream and— oh yeah, right, deaf-mute lady.
As a matter of fact, Ollie, I dropped by because I was a little worried about your wife.
I'm a little worried about it, too. She hasn't eaten hardly a thing and she can't sleep.
Well, I know something that'll make her feel better. A megadose of vitamin LSD.
And then I'm going to give Ollie a prescription for some barbiturates.
Sure, what the hell, give her some of those too. Now you might experience a slight haze all in your brain, and lately things might not seem the same, but that's normal. I'll tell you what's not normal though, what happens after Warren leaves. Damn, that must have been some strong acid. Wonder if he gave her the brown acid from Woodstock. This part of the movie's a lot more like one of William Castle's typical haunted house-style movies, although it does have a sequence with some color where she sees a tub filled with blood. Nowadays this would just be done digitally, but back then it was a little more complicated. According to IMDb, it says this was achieved by filming in color and painting the set black and white and having the actress wear gray makeup, but I don't know if that's accurate. Some sources say that actually the background was filmed in black and white and the tub of red blood was matted in later, and others say the blood was actually manually colored onto the film, and both of those seem more plausible to me than the explanation on IMDb. Regardless of how it was done, it is a pretty neat effect. It might be tame by today's standards, but seeing a tub full of bright red blood was pretty gruesome for 1959. I guess Martha agrees since she apparently dies of fright. Better bring her to Warren for an autopsy though, that way he can make sure she didn't die from being executed.
Ollie, your wife is dead.
Well, I guess I wasn't much of a husband to her now. There's no way I can make up for it.
Wow, I can see you're really torn up about this.
Feel like helping me with some details?
I feel okay.
Okay, did this guy also hate his wife? More bad news, your wife's a zombie. Either that or these two are also on acid. Alright, as you've probably figured out, the real reason she moved is because she couldn't destroy her Tingler, which Warren decides to remove from her body. About time too, we're almost an hour in. Given that it's the 50s, they couldn't show all the gory details of him removing it from her body, but the shadow reveal here is still pretty effective.
The Tingler.
Yep, we know the title. You've told us a bunch of times already. Bad news, it's still alive, but the good news is you can weaken it by screaming even if it's outside the body. Congratulations, honey, you discovered an abomination of science. Now let's celebrate with a drink. His wife also spikes it with something. Well, Warren did do acid earlier, so we know he likes to party. This time, though, he just falls asleep. What, did he have a doctor prescribe him Quaaludes, too? And here's a twist. Turns out all those freaky things Martha was seeing were really set up by Ollie. I guess he really did hate his wife. Okay, this begs the question, if those weren't hallucinations, how exactly did he set up this part? Or was that actually because of the drugs Warren gave her? Speaking of which, the doc's still out and his wife decides to unleash the Tingler on him. As far as the Tingler goes, the effects used for it are pretty crude. It's obviously rubbery and you can see the strings pulling it along most of the time, but the weird centipede-like design is actually pretty good for a 50s flick. With better effects work, I could see a monster like this appearing in a modern movie. It does have a pretty lame weakness, though. And apparently it's otherwise indestructible, so I guess screaming is its kryptonite.
David, to break the laws of nature is always a dangerous thing, and we've not only broken laws, we've violated some basic principles. We had to, but now we're gonna stop.
Okay, you injected a lady with drugs so you could extract a fear parasite, but nice that you've got some scruples now. Oh, but what am I saying? It was all Ollie's fault. He killed his wife to get their silent movie theater money. The doc's totally been on the up and up the entire movie.
You killed her. Your wife was frightened to death. with this.
And also the LSD you gave her hoping to have a weird bug monster grow on her spine. You're not really off the hook here, Doc. Warren wants to transplant the Tingler back into Martha's body. Good thing Ollie just kept it around at his house. However, before he can do that, it escapes after somebody pulls on the strings attached to the container it's in and makes its way down to the silent movie theater, which is surprisingly full. I will say though, it doesn't seem to be a very good place for a first date. Damn, looks like teeny bopper James Cagney ain't getting any tonight. So here's the part of the movie where the Percepto gimmick would come into play, featuring a fourth wall breaking sequence with the Tingler loose in the silent movie theater, and the buzzers being turned on after Vincent Price turns out the lights and says this.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic, but scream! Scream for your lives!
They even show the film stopping and the Tingler moving across the screen in a surprisingly meta move for a 50s movie, although I am a little surprised by what happens next. Okay, if this movie had Hulk Hogan yell at the Tingler to turn the movie back on, that would be pretty awesome. And this guy really should have known better. Projectionist is one of the most dangerous professions there is in old monster movies. Thankfully, his cowardly scream saved him. Alright, let's get this thing packed up and sent off to the next theater. Now that he's got the Tingler back, Warren plans to kill it by transplanting it back into Martha's body. Even though she's dead, and even if she wasn't, she can't scream, but whatever, just go with it. And about Martha being dead.
It isn't as though I'd pulled out a pistol and shot her and taken a knife and stabbed her, is it, Doc?
If you kill anybody deliberately, it's murder.
Okay, again, you're the one who dosed her with acid to try and scare her as part of your experiment. You're not innocent here, Warren. Alright, they don't explicitly say that's what he gave her during this part, but come on. They set it up with Vincent Price taking it and freaking out, and then the next scene he just happens to go check on Martha and inject her with something. Not to mention there's this part.
I don't think anybody could keep from screaming if they were really terrified. Unless
what?
just an idle idea.
Yeah, he definitely dosed her. Now, how exactly Ollie knew he was doing that and decided to do all this other crap to make sure she was scared to death, I don't know. But hey, there's a lot of shit in this movie that doesn't really make sense if you think about it. And speaking of things that don't make sense, get a load of how the movie ends. Ollie pulls a gun on Warren when he says he's going to the police, but he's just like, what are you gonna do, shoot me? Yeah, that's what I thought, nerd. Later. And then this happens. Yeah, that's right. The movie suddenly turns into Night of the Living Death. Sure, why not end it like that? Although not as successful as William Castle's previous movie, House on Haunted Hill, which was released earlier that year, The Tingler was still profitable, perhaps because of the Percepto gimmick. Watching it at home and not in a crowded theater, you obviously don't get the same effect, but it does have some other things going for it. The premise is completely ludicrous, but it's also one that helps make it unique for a 50s horror flick, instead of just doing your typical radioactive monster or alien invader plotline, and the body horror elements and drug trip sequences also help make it memorable beyond just the Percepto gimmick. The movie has fans ranging from John Waters to Joe Dante, and in 2023 it even got a sequel novelization called The Tingler Unleashed. Weirdly enough, while other William Castle films like 13 Ghosts and House on Haunted Hill have gotten remakes, this one never has, even though one's been teased for several years. I actually wouldn't mind a remake of this one. If they played up the body horror aspects and had some convincing effects for the parasite, I could see it working. They might have to think of another gimmick for the theatrical release, though. Speaking of which, I wonder what William Castle would have thought of in the era where you're allowed to drink in movie theaters. But I guess we'll never know. Well, that's all for now. Until next time.
Ladies and gentlemen, just a word of warning. If any of you are not convinced that you have a Tingler of your own, the next time you're frightened in the dark, don't scream.